Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the last Saturday Scholars of the season. I'm Peter Holland. I'm Associate Dean for the Arts in the College of Arts and Letters, and it's my pleasure and it is indeed a pleasure, to do the organising for Saturday Scholars every year. This year was a slightly unusual year for me because I was on leave last semester, and so one of my colleagues actually organised, and I then front the operation. I think it's been a great series, but gosh, we've kept the best till last. It is a very, very extraordinary privilege to be able to introduce Reverend Monk Malloy, who has just published, he tells me, his 9th book, the 3rd volume of his memoirs, talking about the presidential years. And he will, as you can see, be doing a book signing at the end of today's talk. I don't want to introduce him. He can talk far better than I can. Let me just ask you to welcome very enthusiastically Father Malloy.
Thank you, Peter. You have proven the thesis that any port in a storm will work. So whether you came to get out of the snow and wind or just came for me, you're welcome no matter what. I guess the first question you have to address when you write a 3-part memoir, and the last section is now available, is why in the world would you want to do such a thing? Part of it flowed from my sense of responsibility as the leader of this institution for 18 years to give an account of my stewardship. But in order to do that, I felt I also needed to tell the story of where I came from. And so I began this three-part memoir with my birth, of all things, and my family roots, which were reasonably humble. And then my schooling, coming to Notre Dame on a basketball scholarship, my experience here, ending up with a degree in English, my sense of obligation or response to a sense of a call to the priesthood, my seminary years, my ordination, going off to study at Vanderbilt for my doctorate, coming back and joining the faculty. I always had administrative responsibilities. I was head of the college seminary program for 4 years, MDiv director for 4 years, undergraduate theology for 1 year. And then when they were looking for a set of people to potentially succeed Father Ted Hesburgh, 3 of us were given new sets of responsibilities, and I became associate provost and vice president, the number 2 academic officer. And from then, proving that you can fool some of the people all the time, I was elected. I was elected in November, took over in July, and I used that time effectively. I went around to find out advice from sitting presidents. One of the best bits of advice was, don't redo the president's house the first year. Since this is my 37th year in Sarin Hall, and I live in the lap of luxury, I thought I didn't have to worry about that one. I knew that I loved teaching, and so many of the presidents I talked to didn't do any of that stuff. They didn't live in a dorm, and they didn't teach, but I wanted to do both. I thought that flowed out of our Holy Cross sense of mission. And so I'm still doing both, and I love it. I feel very fortunate. When I took over as president, I knew that I was in a time of significant transition because Father Ted had been president for 35 years. Early on, I was asked the question many times, and I was asked after I finished, what was it like to take over for a legend? And my answer then and now would be, he did such a great job and established a sense of momentum in the life of the institution that it made my job a lot easier. I didn't have to worry about financial difficulties or whether we had a clear sense of our identity and mission, whether we had a good pool of people to serve in various administrative responsibilities. Ted advised me 2 things. Take care of your mother, she won't be with you forever. His father had died when he was younger, and his mother lived into some of his later years, and be yourself. And so that's what I strove to do during my presidential years, to be myself. But I also wanted to pick up on a number of things that he had established that I thought were important for the future of the institution. So a number of the institutes and centers that Ted had established, I asked him, after I took over as president, to maintain the leadership role with the boards of those groups. He did that for a period of time, and then eventually I took over for him in those roles. But it allowed him, I think, to keep his enthusiastic presence in the life of the institution and to bring his advice and wisdom to the common life here. When Ted was elected president, it was simply a function of the board of the Holy Cross community, the provincial council, and they had a meeting in the basement of the basilica in the parish. They gave him the keys and said, well, get started. That day was gone, so when I was elected president, it was the first time we had a chance to have an inauguration ceremony. Now, the inauguration may seem like it's a big ego boost, but it's really about telling the story about the institution, inviting guests from outside, trying to up the ante of enthusiasm so that people will be supportive of the kind of things that you're trying to achieve. So one of the things that happened in my first year, there's 18 chapters in my book for 18 years as president. In the first chapter, I try and lay out a typical schedule. Every year, we have orientation and junior parent weekend and commencement, and the end of the year, staff and faculty dinner. We have home football weekends where we bring all these advisory councils as we do this weekend. So I had a role to play in all of those. We have the alumni board. A lot of local alumni clubs invite you to come and speak at the year-end dinners and so on. So those were part of my schedule, simply ex officio as president. But I also wanted to continue living in Sorin, and I wanted to be present to the vast array of people who make up Notre Dame. And so I set myself in my first year, along with Father Bill Beauchamp, my executive VP, and Tim O'Mara, the provost, to get out there and interact with all the different units of the university. That wasn't unusual. I think a lot of new CEOs do that. But this is a very complex, in a sense, vast institution. I lived most of my adult life here, and I discovered there were units I didn't know existed, just as a reminder. But it was a very interesting opportunity for me to learn as much as I could, and also to establish the precedent of meeting on a regular basis with faculty who had been newly given tenure or promoted in rank. And so I established the precedent every year of meeting with a cross-section of faculty. I also established the precedent of going out to the different dorms every year and having a little Q&A, giving a little talk and then asking for questions, so I could be present. Most of you know that I was a basketball player, and I played twice a week with the students in the dorm. I also participated in bookstore basketball every year. So that was another way of kind of creating a certain kind of image. Teaching seminar. I didn't teach my first year, but I taught all the other years. And that was a great opportunity for me on a regular basis to share a set of readings and reflections and movies to get first-year undergraduate students. I always taught first years as a president, to stimulate them, to get them off to a great start at Notre Dame. And I always had kind of broad themes that I was trying to get them to reflect about. They're also very diverse in their composition. And so, in a sense, this reflected the new Notre Dame. And I've really gotten to know a lot of these students through the years, and I'm very proud of what they ended up doing with their lives. They are bright and talented, good-willed, and I'm delighted to be able to say, not just because of me, but because of their experience here, that Notre Dame has been good for them. In the first year, we also had the International Special Olympic Games, which brought people from all over the country and around the world. Father Ted had negotiated that, and so I asked him and Father Joyce to be here for that celebration. We actually filled much of the football stadium for the opening event and the closing events in the Joyce Center. And of course, if you've ever been to Olympics, Special Olympics, you know, it's all about nobody loses, everybody wins, and hugs and celebrations, and it's just a wonderful kind of activity. In that first year, Father Bill Beauchamp's parents were murdered out of the blue. And we had to deal with that reality. He had to deal with it, and all of us who wanted to support him had to deal with it as well. I also had the invitation from David Link and Darcy Chisholm, who was a person who worked in the administrator in the Center for Social Concerns, about establishing the South Bend Center for the Homeless. And when the clothing store in South Michigan became available, they came to me and said, would you be willing to ask for a loan from the Board of Trustees to get the Center for the Homeless established? And the trustees agreed to $1 million loan. We purchased the property. We got it off to a good start. It's always been headed by Notre Dame people, and it's now a model in terms of programming and success of homeless centers around the country. So a lot of things happened. Strategic Moment campaign was well underway. I had to get very much involved in the fundraising side of the job, and I think we got off to a great start. In the next 3 years, we tried to highlight different aspects of our aspiration. The year of cultural diversity, the year of the family, the year of women. And in each of those cases, we brought in speakers, we had special events, we tried to do things at the call level to get the faculty involved in their various courses, and to end that period with a special celebration. That was succeeded by the sesquicentennial year, 175 years, 150 years, sorry, 175 is coming up. And we milked it for all we could, actually. We celebrated for more than a year. And one of the things that was connected to that, when we renovated the basilica, it was the church then, we got Rome to approve designating it as a basilica, which is a kind of honorary recognition of a place that's a lively center of worship, place of pilgrimage, provides all the pastoral services that one would expect. And it was a great honor for Notre Dame to be recognized in this particular kind of way. Then we had the year of Rudy and Domers. Rudy, of course, has become the iconic Notre Dame movie. I used to ask people at orientation, how many of you have watched Rudy? All the hands would go up. How many have watched it more than once? The hands would go up. That was one of those movies that did reasonably well in the theaters, but it did much better in the home market. And it was one way of telling the Notre Dame story. I actually knew Rudy when he was a regular student. One time I was signing one of my books in the bookstore, and I had a hat on. I said, how would you like me to make it out? He said, Rudy. And I looked, oh, it's Rudy. Anyway, he went off into the bookstore, and some young guys came by, and I said, you know who's in the bookstore? Rudy. They went looking for Sean Astin. Rudy doesn't look at all like Sean Astin. We then had a chance, because of the success of our campaign, the Strategic Moment campaign, to begin an aggressive expansion of the facilities on the campus. And I assure you that John Jenkins and I and Ted Esper, none of us said, geez, I want to build a lot of buildings. This isn't high in your list when you wake up in the morning. But when you have a planning process, we went through a lot of those, and you try to identify the needs and the potential, there's always buildings connected to that, as well as scholarships, new professorships, and various kinds of academic programs. And so about 6 or 7 years in, we did a lot of significant changes. For example, the expansion of the stadium. I said to people, I'm not expanding that stadium unless the faculty demand it. So I put together, as part of our planning process, a committee made up of the athletic director and all faculty. And they looked at all the reasons why expanding the stadium would be good for everybody else. And they came to me and petitioned that we expanded the stadium, which of course I was happy to satisfy. It just gives you an idea that in a university environment, it takes time, takes process, takes a lot of input, but you can get a lot of things done reasonably expeditiously. And so that was a big thing as well. The following year, I was able to bring to the campus the assembly, every 3-year assembly of the International Federation of Catholic Universities. Now, in one sense, who cares? But on the other sense, these are all the Catholic universities around the world, and it gave us a chance to show off, to give people a sense of what we were up to, and they were very impressed, including liturgically, that we worshiped every day, and we were able to utilize the musicians and the singers that serve us so well during the course of the year. And a lot of them don't have that kind of talent available to them. So they were very impressed. Along the way, I had a chance to spend time with a lot of heads of state, with all the American presidents in various settings, on campus, at the White House, at Camp David, in the Executive Office building, almost all of the Central American heads of state, 2 of the presidents of Chile, 2 of Brazil, the head of the United Nations, the president of Germany, 3 Taoiseachs of Ireland, and so on. All of that gave us a chance to try to make Notre Dame better known, to see us, have them see us as an international actor, and have them recognize the kind of programs that were available here and our commitment to teaching languages and cultures. So, for example, I had a meeting with the then president of Brazil, and he had present for the meeting his education minister, and they made a pledge to make money available to promote the study of Portuguese at Notre Dame and to facilitate our students going and spending time in various parts of Brazil. We gave an award in a time of peaceful transition between governments from contending parties in Brazil. I had a chance with 2 of the presidents, one of Brazil and one of Chile, to talk to them when they were starting their term of service and then when they were finishing. They described what they were going to try to do and then what worked and what didn't work. What an honor it is to be involved in that kind of conversation. As we tried to reach out internationally, become more global, of course our new Institute for Global Affairs reflects the momentum that was established over the years in that regard. I traveled a lot internationally. I've been to 80 countries. I was involved in establishing Notre Dame, Australia, and I'm still on the board there. Now it's 12,000 students. It was established, it started in 1991, and it's become a major force for good in Australia. We have these wonderful centers in London, in Dublin, and various other places around the world, and now in Rome, and we have relationships with pre-existing institutions so that we can make the world available to our Notre Dame undergraduate and graduate and professional students. All of that was to the good. One of the fruits of our fundraising efforts was financial aid. When we started it, we didn't think we were very good at raising money for financial aid, one of our primary needs. And we found out that when students have received that kind of benefit, they are great tellers of the story of how much difference it made in their lives. And so instead of having people like me get up and tell why it's good to give money for financial aid, they got up and told the story and thanked people profusely for what a difference it had made in their lives. Along the way in my book, I talk about the town-gown relationship. The Center for the Homeless is just one dimension of that. I'm a big city guy. grow up in Washington, D.C., and I'm natively interested in how cities function. And so when I was the vice president, Father Beauchamp, Father Tyson, and I took the initiative at Father Hesburgh's approval to reach out to the city governments, to the county council, to the business leadership, to the neighborhood organizations. So when I took over, we were able to take advantage of that and build on it. And I think we've been able to foster a good relationship with our surrounding areas. And south of us now, if you haven't been here for a while, if you take the trip down Eddy Street or Notre Dame Avenue, you see the kind of investment in our neighborhood surrounding us that's been going on. It's way beyond whatever imagined was possible. One of the hallmarks of us as a university is being a Catholic university. Almost all the years of my presidency, I was involved at the invitation of Rome and later the American Catholic bishops in the ongoing conversation about Ex Cordie Ecclesiae, this document that Pope John Paul II put out on Catholic universities. I actually have one of the lines I contributed in the final document. And that I learned a lot, and it really helped us to be more reflective about what it meant to be a Catholic university, to try to strike the right balance between our heritage of supporting academic freedom and then being a place that stood for a certain kind of set of values that we thought made life meaningful and full. Even though at any given moment some people are going to be happy about one thing or another, I think if anyone spends time on our campus, they can see that we take very seriously this mission that I carry on as a Holy Cross priest from of our founding community. There were moments along the way that were challenging to all of us. I have a long section in my book about the aftermath of 9/11. Of all the things I did during my presidential years, the one that stands out the most was the Mass on the South Quad on that day with up to 10,000 people. A beautiful day that belied the reality of what was going on outside. And of course, if you remember back, there was so much uncertainty about what was next. They brought all the planes down. There were obviously four planes that were involved in violent outcomes, but we didn't know what was next. We were worried at first, of course, about the well-being and health of families connected to our students. Then we had the first home football weekend with Michigan State. We raised money for the families of those who had lost their lives. We raised a lot of money. We had the flags around the stadium. The two bands played Amazing Grace at halftime. There was a sense that we needed to try and build our spirits back up again. About 40 or 50 days after the events, I was a guest of the New York City Police and Fire Departments for 2 full days at Ground Zero. I was right in the midst of it all. I watched bodies being removed and had all my senses touched, and it'll be part of my memory bank forever. Later on, I went back and we delivered an ambulance to St. Vincent's Hospital. There was also the women's swim team accident where we had 2 die, 1 seemingly paralyzed, and 18 others injured. And that was a very challenging, emotional moment for all of us. But as I think most of us know, Notre Dame's never better than a time of crisis and grief. So everybody rose to the occasion. Haley Scott DeMaria, the one who was paralyzed, came back to swim, wrote a book about her experience, What Though the Odds, and now they're close to making a movie about her life, and we've given permission to film on campus. I had to deal with some not very pleasant things. The aftermath of the sex abuse crisis. We had one former major administrator had to be banned from the campus, and everybody who was affected by him had to be responded to appropriately. We tried to set the bar very high. I had 2 women vice presidents who were married and had children oversee everything that we did. I gave them carte blanche. Whatever you need to do to set things right, that's what we're going to do. We had the Kim Dunbar case, where a woman who was connected to the football program indirectly because she belonged to one of the support groups, was involved with some of our players. It led to our first major NCAA penalty. I spent about 4.5 hours in 15-minute increments responding to every form of media there is. My message was not saying it wasn't important, but apologizing for what happened, assuring everybody that we would do everything we could to make sure it didn't happen again, that we'd review everything we did. We put new protective mechanisms in place. And that's what happened, and I don't think anybody's heard about that lately. So I think it's a sign that it's not good when you have to respond to things like that, but you do the best you can, and then you try to move on very positively. I had to make coaching changes and an athletic director change. And of course, the network now with the internet means everybody has a strong opinion about everything and have as many words of advice to offer. We did it the best we could. In my book, I actually analyze what we did and how we did it and who was available. And so you can review. Why is it so hard to hire a coach? It's so darn expensive. Nobody's available. The ones who are available, if you do background checks, you may not want. You have to pay, if they're high-profile coaches, you have to pay the school they come from. You got to pay the person that you're not retaining, and then you got to up the ante to get the person to come, and then you hope it works. If we didn't have television money, the whole enterprise of intercollegiate athletics would collapse. So be alert. The concussion debate is not going to go away. People are suing everybody, professional and college. Now, I love athletics. I was an athlete myself. But I just want to say, from the perspective of the president, you are limited in what you can do, and there's always financial ramifications. Toward the end of my presidency, there were some moments of conflict within the administration and with the Board of Trustees. They got worked out. Eventually, I finished my term of service as president with a kind of great farewell tour, for which I was extremely grateful. And when I finished my service as president, I was asked, what is the one thing you're most proud of? And so here's my answer, because I'm going to open it up for questions in a second. I was most proud that we did multiple things simultaneously, that we paid attention to the quality of undergraduate instruction, but also the instruction quality at the professional and graduate level, teaching, that we made major inroads in the quality of the research environment at Notre Dame, financially and otherwise, which meant library and computing capacity and so on, laboratory space. I think if you look at the history of Notre Dame in the last 20 years, you'll see amazing progress in that regard. We wanted to be more fully coeducational. Ted, of course, one of the great contributions during his time as president was for Notre Dame to go coeducational. And what I wanted to do was to make sure that we were bringing that through the whole system. Women in presidential roles as deans, more women on the faculty, and so on. And celebrate the achievements of the women of Notre Dame, which are noteworthy. To be more culturally diverse, to build on what we had already established and then take it to the next level. When I took over as president, we were 7.5% census category minorities. And when I finished, it was like 21%. And now Notre Dame is more and more diverse than it's been in the past. We wanted to, of course, pay attention to our Catholic identity, build on the town-gown relationship, be more national and international in our focus. And so I've already addressed that aspect. We also wanted to be successful in fundraising, and in the growth of our endowment, which is now $10 billion. And we wanted to make sure we had balanced budgets. So we had balanced budgets every year. We never fired people as a category. When the Morris Inn closed, this wasn't my time, but it's an example, everybody who worked in the Morris Inn was offered, while it was being redone, a job somewhere else at Notre Dame. That's the Notre Dame way. Of course, people were fired for incompetence or felony or whatever, but we had a stable workplace when many of the large companies in our area were reducing in size or leaving. And so we became more and more responsible for the quality of life in our overall community. So all of those things were important to me. Our financial aid resources grew substantially, and I think we see the result. I teach a course now, a seminar on biography and autobiography, so the people in my class are really good. They're very talented. And if you look at them, or if I look at them, they represent the spectrum of humanity. And when I walk in there at the beginning of the semester, I can't tell you who are going to be the best students among them. They are, I think, what we've been striving to achieve here. And I think they're very generous. And we've been able, with our dorm structure in life, to make sure that the residential tradition at Notre Dame carries on in all of its richness. So, if you're from Notre Dame, if you went here, if you're a parent, if you're a friend, I hope you're proud of what's happened over the last 30 years or 40 years, 50 years if you count Ted. And that's what I try and write about in my book. Thank you. So I'm used to running seminars, and I could go row to row, but I'd be delighted to maybe, for a little bit, if you could ask me anything you're interested in. If you need to go, go. I'm not insulted. I've been around for a while. If there was only one person left, I'd still be here.
Share the deliberation that you went through as you decided to step away from being president of the institution.
Well, my book is not a tell-all book. I mean, you know, the classic one was Mommy Dearest. I don't know if you ever heard of that, but anyway, there's elements of the transition that are not in the book. I just put stuff in the book that was public. There was basically, the question always lingers on, how long should somebody be a president? So Ted was president 35 years. And at the end of 30, that's when they said, well, you got to bring some people who are potential candidates to succeed him. So he could have been president for 30 years and 35 if they thought, the trustees, that somebody was ready at the time. And so as I went through the kind of 5-year increments, there's always a question, because fundraising campaigns are connected to that, and the process of discernment through the whole community of what your goals and aspirations should be are part of it as well. The wisdom is you don't want to have a president who's only there for part of the campaign if you can avoid it. And most presidents, if they've done a couple of campaigns, don't want to do another one. So those are all relevant. And then the question is, I tried to bring people along behind me. For example, Mark Poorman, who's now the president at the University of Portland, was in my administration, first as executive to me, then as vice president of student affairs. Then he was invited to go to Portland as executive assistant to the president, and then he became president. Now that's a nice succession. He has a lot of experience. He brings the best of what Holy Cross is about. He's a very talented guy. And normally that's the kind of thing that you would expect. It was more complicated here for a variety of reasons that I don't want to go into, but the part that's public you can read in my book. That's all I'm going to say. Yes. Who else? Yes.
Good question. As a parent of a senior here now,
Uh-huh.
very proud, and a senior in high school, I'm very concerned about cost of attendance next year, I think tuition's gonna be up to about $50,000. The fact that Notre Dame really doesn't give much merit scholarships and stuff, what do you envision as the future of that and how it's gonna affect students' population?
You know, I used to say to our admissions people and our financial aid people, wouldn't it be great if Notre Dame were free? And they said no. They don't think it ought to be free because then you get people coming for the wrong reasons. But we should be affordable. And that's our goal, to try to be as affordable as we can. The pressure points, as we all know, are we're trying to pay top salaries to attract the best faculty. We have, I think, first-class facilities in programming. We have a lot of support services in dorm life and campus ministry and all of that. So all of that costs money. In fact, the tuition doesn't cover the cost of the debt side of the university. So the question then, how can you make up for that? Well, by building your endowment up to as high as possible and having successful fundraising and having people specify that they'd like to give money, particularly for financial aid. I can tell you an anecdote because I think it's telling. A guy and his wife, he lived in Sarin. I did their wedding right after he graduated. Recently, he and his wife gave a very substantial gift to Notre Dame, and the specification for the gift was the bottom socioeconomic pool, but not just tuition, room, and board, but also travel, books, football tickets, class ring, other kinds of things, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to afford it. And I said, well, why did you do that? That's wonderful. He said, because one day I asked you, maybe when I was a student, what was the hardest thing to raise money for, and what would be the greatest thing that you could do for Notre Dame? And that's what I told him. He said, that's why I did it. Well, I had no idea that what happened, a conversation that happened 20 or 30 years ago, would lead to that kind of result. But that's what we're hoping we can do more of. We use the money from bowls that we've been in and the TV contract for those kinds of purposes. We've been able to build the financial aid resources. Now, obviously, if you're in an economic level where that's where the conflict is, that's where the merit aid becomes a challenge. We do have some merit aid. There have been people that gave money for that particular purpose, and we're trying to utilize that as effectively as we can. So I don't know when, in the foreseeable future, we'll be able to do it for free or make it easily affordable for everybody. But I would guarantee you that that's going to continue to be the top priority in the fundraising side, and God willing, we'll get better at it. So I guess that's my answer. Since I don't run it anymore, I can pledge anything. Anybody? Yes.
There is a real tension in universities everywhere between research and teaching. As you really directed the research effort at Notre Dame, how did you see a balance there, or did you see an issue in terms of maintaining the teaching focus along with the research?
Well, surely there's a tension, because when the kind of people that we hire that go to the best graduate schools, everything about their education and the orientation they receive when they start job hunting is to look for a position where they can make their mark as researchers, but knowing they have to teach also. We've tried very hard, and Tom Burrish, our provost, and our previous provosts have worked at it, and our deans, on making sure we're hiring people that want to be effective teachers as well and bring great enthusiasm to that. Now, I can't guarantee you that everybody that we hire as a researcher, is equally good at teaching. But that's what Notre Dame's about, and everybody knows it. And one of the reasons that I've enjoyed teaching during my whole administrative career is I love teaching, and I want to be available for the students entrusted to our care. And I know a lot of people that feel that way. And I know a lot of other schools where that's not the priority. So that's why we do these reviews of the quality of teaching constantly. And we look, when people are going through the promotion process, the committees that review that take quite seriously what people say about the quality of teaching. I remember when I first became president, I would get these files of people up for promotion. And you look at the file and be, well, let's say a 0 bad, 10 good. Somebody'd have a 1 when they started. And then they'd say, but when they're up for tenure, they got up to 3. They jumped 2 points. We go, 3? I mean, that's not what we're about. We want to jump up toward 10, not toward 3. And I think that's the kind of standard that we're trying to live by here presently. And when I ask my students, I go out with students a lot and have chats with them and all. And I tell me about your best teachers. And they tell me these great stories about what kind of impact their teachers have had upon them. And so very seldom do I hear complaints about our teachers, and I think that's a good sign. A couple more, and then we'll call it quits, and I'll sign some books for anybody's interested.
I forget the acronym, the Catholic Teachers Program.
ACE.
Yes.
Alliance for Catholic Education.
Did you have something to do with starting that?
Yeah, Father Tim Scully was the one who started it with Sean McGraw, and I gave him great enthusiastic support, and it's really made a huge difference. It's a lot of our graduates go in that for a year or two. They do a 2-year degree, but they teach during that time, and they come here in the summers. And a good percentage stay in the teaching profession, but if they don't, they've made their contribution. And what it does, it brings into the Catholic primary and secondary school systems around the country very bright and talented young people. And some of our least supported schools. So I think it's a great program, and it's doing quite well. They also have a program for training principals and superintendents for Catholic schools, and that's also been quite productive. Anyway, it's a good question. Anyone else? Yes.
What's your hope for the future of Notre Dame education after the approval of the new core curriculum this past week?
Yeah, we have approval of a new core curriculum. I chaired, or I was on the two previous curriculum committee that went through the review, and I was chaired the next one. There's nothing more painful in a modern university than to chair the curriculum reform committee. Everybody's vested interests come to the surface. The only thing worse is to redo the calendar. What do you mean we're going to, you can imagine how the conversation goes. One of our priests one time, when he was a student government leader, came to the last academic council meeting with the proposal to have 4 study days before exams. This was unheard of. We had no study days before. And people were so tired. It was right at the end of the meeting. I don't think anybody paid attention. They said, well, let's vote on it. All those in favor. Next thing you know, we had 4 study days. Anyway. As I read the curriculum reform, it tries to be more flexible in the ways that some of the requirements can be satisfied. And the department that I think probably may regret that it wasn't more forceful is philosophy. Because we had 2 philosophy requirements, 2 theology, 2 math, so on. And now we only have 1 philosophy requirement. And the other one can be done in a variety of ways. It doesn't depend on the philosophy department. This is where the vested interests come in. Because you can justify a certain size faculty if you have to cover all these required courses. And then you have doctoral and master's courses. But once you don't have those required courses, over time, somebody's going to come along and say, you don't need all those faculty because you don't have as many courses to cover. Anyway, that's what goes on. I think the philosophy behind it was trying to update where we are relative to all the different areas of study. So let me give you an example. Should we have a required course in technology? Well, everybody should know more about technology, right? But we already have all these required courses. And so when these accrediting committees come in from different colleges, They say, you have too many required courses. We need more of this in engineering or something. So that's the balance, trying to figure out the best way to do that. But I think the conversation was quite healthy, and I think the final result will be implemented very successfully. Yes.
Thinking about Father Hesper's legacy and using some of the terms that you talked about today, I think of the past. I think of terms like social justice. You said cultural diversity, values. Kind of in that context, in the history of Notre Dame and Father Ted's legacy, your own legacy. What does Notre Dame do to influence or remain relevant in today's political environment where nationalism is seeming popular, where globalization is bad? What role does Notre Dame play in influencing today's political environment?
When the electioneering was going on, I have strong opinions about these matters, but I'll keep them myself. When the electioneering was going on, sometimes students would ask me about something relative to the candidates, and I would say, it's your responsibility, since you're often voting for the first time, not to turn to me to tell you who to vote for, but to study the issues and try and take your values and apply them, because that's what you're going to have to do the rest of your life. What we do here, I think, is to provide a value framework. We have courses that can help people understand how the political system works. For those who have lived and studied abroad, they can see what other systems or non-systems look like. And it's for all the, there's a famous quote from Reinhold Niebuhr about democracy may not be the best form of government, but it beats all the other alternatives. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. I've been to totalitarian societies run by dictators, secret police. I've seen what all that does. And I think the more that we can keep our elements of a free and open society where everybody can feel welcome and appreciated for who they are, the better off we're going to be. These sources of tension that we see today in the aftermath of the election from different points of view need to be discussed openly and not just writing off our enemies as irrational, people that don't agree with us. I've interacted with presidents of both political parties on a regular basis, and I don't think they could tell you whether I was a voter for them or not, but they could tell you pretty clearly what kind of things I thought they ought to be giving attention to. And I think that's what we're going to try to continue to do. There's a lot of sources of tension on campus right now, not just our campus, but all campuses. I think Father Jenkins is doing a great job trying to stay on top of those and the rest of the people. But the worst thing that could happen was we end up with camps that won't even talk to each other and a government that simply doesn't function. That's my opinion anyway. Yes?
Where do you stand on the religious diversity on campus? I can remember a few years ago there was some problems with a minister of the Muslim religion being on campus here. Where does that stand?
We're, by self-definition, which isn't always as reliable as it might be, about 84% Catholic in our undergraduate student body. I think that there's a certain number of cultural Catholics among those at best. But, you know, we are, I think, a vibrant center of Catholic life and worship. We also have Protestant students, and we try to provide a chance for them to worship in their own tradition if they wish. We have Jewish students, not very many, and we have Muslim Hindu students. I've taught 2 students in my seminar that wore veils, and they were just amazingly popular and vibrant in their personalities. So that wasn't like they fitted some stereotype of somebody wearing a veil and being shy and reserved. They weren't at all. I think we've made a lot of progress in the intercultural understanding. the course materials I use in my seminar reflect places of the world that are diverse, religiously and otherwise. And it leads to conversations. Well, a classic conversation in my class is, what do you think about an arranged marriage? It's very rational. A lot of success there. Just learn to fall in love. They go, you got to be kidding me. What about locking eyes across the room? My favorite song. Well, anyway. So I try to get people to think about why in certain parts of the world and in certain cultural and religious heritages, people have different ways of thinking about fundamental institutions like marriage. Wearing the chador. What about the role of women in certain parts of Islamic culture? I mean, all of these things that need to be discussed. I happen to be a semi-expert on terrorism, anti-terrorism, suicide bombing, drone warfare, and other unpleasant topics. And so I think I know about the worst of how terrorism across cultural and religious bounds manifests itself. And we can distinguish between, Islam is a huge religion. Just, if you think about what are the largest Muslim countries in the world, Indonesia, Turkey, Iran, India, the largest countries are different from the ones that have received so much attention. Anyway, I think there are terrorist trends in Christianity, in some forms of Judaism, in Hinduism. So it's as if it's only manifest in one cultural or religious tradition. So we just need to stay on top of that. We need to be discriminating in the way we think about members of a large religious heritage and then some sub-part of that are threats to our collective well-being. And we're trying to get people to think in those terms here. And that's the kind of thing we talk about in my class and other classes. One more question and then we'll call it quits. Who wants to ask one last, yes?
With a candidate, President-elect Donald Trump, who says he's not a politician, you, the President of Notre Dame, with 4 different presidents of the United States, how would you advise Father Jenkins on reaching out to a change in the guard at the White House on the matter of politics to education to cultural diversity of the United States?
I think the best thing that John can do is try to represent higher education, Catholic higher education, and the concerns of our students and faculty. And how he does that will depend on what the issue is and what his opportunities are. I know he wants to do that, and he will, but in a time of transition, he just has to do the best that he can in trying to calm the waters in the interval before we actually have a new presidential administration. So I know he's staying on top of it, getting good advice, and I'm confident he'll do a good job in that regard. Thank you all very much for coming.